What's up everyone, it's Austin here from Make Pop Music and Austin Hall Audio and Visual, and I hope you're doing well. We are back with another tutorial, and this week I wanted to cover something that we see a lot of questions on, and it's a big area of weakness that I hear in a lot of people's productions that they may send me to get feedback on, and that is how to get drums sitting perfectly in the mix, and just how to make the drums feel a little bit more cohesive with the production in general. So today we're going to go over my 5 tips that you can use to help your drum arrangement, and to actually get those drums sitting a little bit better in your production, where they're still punchy and they're still audible, however they're not just way over the top and they don't sound disconnected from everything else that's going on. So if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It helps us out a ton, and we really appreciate all the support. If you have any tips of your own, feel free to leave those in the comments, because we're always kind of reading through and seeing if there's anything that I can learn, and I know a lot of the viewers will read the comments and see if there's anything that they can also pull out of. So I would love to hear whatever you're doing to help your drums kind of set a little bit better. But without further ado, let's actually go ahead and hop into my DAW and see the 5 tips I think you can do to get your drum sitting a little bit better and to get that perfect drum sound in your pop production. Alright, so the first tip we're going to go over is when you're messing with drum samples, most of them will have a pitch. Some of them will be super tonal, like a kick drum or a really tonal snare, and some won't have something that's like a, straight on pitch. However, they do still have some kind of overall pitch to them, and I've really found that messing with that pitch and messing with that tuning can really help them sit a lot better in the mix, rather than just dragging in a sample and hoping that it's in the right key or it's just in the right kind of frequency spectrum that you need. So we have the OG drums here, which are the samples that I brought in. So let's just go ahead and take a look at a couple of them. So we have this little blip snare right here that is super tonal. So you can hear that right there. However, it's not in the right key with the song. So when you have elements like this that you still want to use as a percussive element, I'm going to drag this down 2 semitones, so we have more of like an A, or we go from like an A to I believe a G. So that's feeling better to me automatically, just doing something like that where we can bring it down into the actual key of the song. And then here we're going to have an element that's not super tonal. However, I don't think that the original kind of pitch of this really fits. So we have that nice little rim hit to kind of go with that blip. However, I feel like that rim hit is really bright and sharp. And rather than just EQing out some of the high end, what we can do is we can tune it down. So I'll tune it down like 8 semitones. And on Cubase, all you have to do is you can just highlight whatever you want to pitch, and then you can go to transpose. You could also drag in something like micro or like a little altar boy, or you could actually open up the panel on the bottom, and then you can manually transpose all of those. But we're just going to do it like this because this should do everything we kind of need it to. That's better. That's kind of giving me more of that door knocky vibe instead of like that really high snare rim hit that I'm wanting. So things like that can go a really, really long way. And then probably most importantly is going to be tuning your kick drum. And this will help if you're kind of layering your kick over your 808, and especially if you have a kick that's got a lot of kind of sub frequency. So like we've got this kick in here. But I think I want to pull it down maybe 2 semitones. And we're already in a much better starting place, because now once we're actually in the key of the song, we can make EQ decisions a lot better, and we can make sure that we're not taking out fundamental frequencies that we need to kind of layer over our 808. And we're just not going to get any, especially on something like a sub, we're not going to get any weird like low frequency oscillation between maybe this playing an A while the sub's playing a G, and vice versa. So it's really, really important to at least get your kick in the right key of the song, and then also go ahead and put any kind of like tonal elements like that blip in the right key, and then just play around with things like rim shots and snares and claps and hats kind of to taste. Because to me, it's so much easier to get a drum sitting better when it fits in the key of the song, rather than just immediately going into EQ and compression and trying to do things where you're tonally reshaping the whole thing rather than just putting it in the right area to begin with. So number 1 is going to be actually change the pitch and mess with the tuning and the key of your samples to fit your song. So the next thing you're going to want to do is mess with some of your things like attack and decay. So I do this before I start compressing, because sometimes you just need to reshape the sample a little bit better. Like we have this kick in here. But to me, it's a little long and it has a lot of sub-frequency, especially when we're going to layer it over this kind of bass. So So what I like to do is, specifically with my kicks and snares, is I'll go into Groove Agent where I'm typically writing them, and I'll just kind of shorten them up, and then I'll kind of color in a nice little tail. So there's this kind of rule of thumb with kicks, especially, that the shorter it is, the less kind of sub frequency you're going to get, because it takes the sub a second to engage. So if you make it too short like this, it's not even going to have a chance to hit that low end. So you do want it decently long. However, this one's really long, so maybe we'll go somewhere like right here and shorten it up. And then vice versa, we're going to do the opposite to this clap. And I have this clap just dragged in as a sample, so what we're going to do is we're going to open up an envelope shaper. And sometimes things have a little bit too much transient, or they're a little bit too short. And you can fix that with something like this, where let's maybe take down the attack a little bit. Let's up that sustain a bit. Let's see that. Let's see, we're softening it up just a little bit. We could even go a little bit more aggressive because it is a pretty snappy clap. That's probably a little too much. That's probably a little bit better, and that's just going to lengthen out that clap a little bit to make sure that we're not kind of having a little bit too much transient, especially since we're layering it with that rim hit and that blip. And then let's just go ahead, and we can even do the same thing on the kick, so I can just kind of display how to do this if you're using a sample or if you're in the mixing process and you're not in something like Groove Agent. So we could increase the transient, make it a little bit longer, that's going to give us a little bit more sub, and then cut down that release. So as you can hear, in solo it sounds good, but in the mix it's starting to lose a little bit of that energy. So you want to be careful, especially with kicks, about how much you're going to shorten them and how hard you're going to make that attack, because if you're making them way too pokey, they're just not going to have a lot of that meat and potatoes that you need to carry that song. So after you go ahead and set everything to the key of the song and you tune everything, definitely go ahead and start playing around with all of that stuff before you start EQing a ton and compressing a ton, because EQ and compression, it's really easy to go into the woods, where if you're just shortening and lengthening samples and kind of adjusting the ADSR of them, I think that's going to get you probably in a lot better ball field, especially if you're using pre-processed samples. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about our third tip, and that is going to be compression and EQ. So now we're getting a little bit more into the mixing terms, and this is really just going to depend on, you could do this as part of your sound design and just your actual arrangement, or if you want to save it to the mix, you can. There's a lot of things that I like to do that are more so sound design based. So let's go ahead and look at right here what we're going to do to this rim hit. And if you've seen our videos, you'll know that I use Camel Crusher a lot on drums. To me, especially for like snares and percussive little things like that, it adds so much little poke, and it just has a nice little bit of saturation where it's going to make the sample feel a lot bigger and a lot stabbier, but it's not going to feel really thin. So it is going to compress it, but it's going to compress it to the point where you're not just only getting transient and then it's just like a little blip that you barely hear. So we've added that on this rim hit instead of having something like this. And I've got the filter engaged. So since we're kind of in a more lo-fi, kind of slow R&B realm, I am going to have a lot of these samples filtered out, and we'll get to that when we talk about the EQ in 1 second. But let's just go ahead and bypass that so you can hear the compression on this. It just adds a ton of bite that I really like, especially in things like that are going to act as a snare. And you'll see we did it too with this little blip right here, opposed to this. So this is a really good example of how drastic this can really be. So this is giving it that really stabby, pokey sonar sound where it is going to poke through a mix, because if we didn't have that, it would sound like this. saturation, especially being such a filtered out drum sound, and we need a lot of that compression. So using something like Camel Crusher on like your blips, your rim hits, your snaps, claps, stuff like that, it's gonna give you a lot of that transient attack that's really gonna help it shine in the mix without making it just way too pokey. For the kick, I don't really like to compress like electronic kicks a ton. They're already normally super compressed coming in if you're using a sample pack. So what I normally do is just kind of tighten up the EQ, and this is just a good example of how light you can take it. So here it is bypass. And this is one of those things that like you wouldn't traditionally do this in solo. You would probably at least have the bass turned up. And the reason we're EQing it like this is specifically with EQ and compression, you want to be really methodical and make sure that every move you're doing has a point. So for this, we're just getting rid of a little bit of that sub because it's kind of building up once we have that bass come in. And then we're just going to boost this like 100 right here where that's kind of the more punchiness of the kick and not so subby, you know, kind of loose low end. So once we layer it up with that bass, so we're just tightening up that kick to make sure that that bass has a little bit more room to be big and shine, especially since it's such a sustained kind of pad-driven bass. And it's something that's got a lot of mid characteristics and a lot of sub characteristics. We want to make sure that that super subby kick is not going to step on that. So of course we've done some sidechain compression with the bass to the kick, but even more so than that, we really wanted to make sure that we were tightening up this low end of this kick and making sure that we're not going to overdrive a sub, or we're not going to blow somebody's speaker when they turn it up, and we're not going to push the limiter way too hard where we can't get a lot of volume out of this, and it's just kind of a big, muddy, subby mess. The tighter you can get your low end, typically the louder you can get your song, and the bigger the low end will end up sounding in the final master. So if you're finding your low end is not feeling right or it's muddy, honestly just take a little bit of that down. Just get the overall balance a little bit better and get that relationship between the kick and the sub working a little bit better. And then you should be able to boost up that limiter quite a bit. Now we've done some EQ and compression. Let's see, is there anything else that we kind of EQ'd? Yes. We did some EQ on the blips here. And that was just to filter these out. So you can see here, once again, we had kind of a lot of low end from this saturated little sonar hit. So we're just going to get rid of that. Again, tightening up stuff so we can make room for that sub and for that kick and not really having a bunch of other stuff get in that way. So now we've got the kick and the claps and the hats. And you can tell, opposed to something like this, let's go ahead and take off everything that we had done, so it's just kind of the samples as they are. So you can hear now the difference. All right, so now we've gotten it in the right key. We've made sure the samples were all the right length and they kind of fit the arrangement, and we've made sure that we compressed them and EQ'd them to tighten up the dynamics and to tighten up the frequency range. Let's go ahead and talk about the fourth and probably the most important on this particular drum mix, and that is using things like reverb and delay and other spatial effects to give your drums a little bit of space. This is going to range really widely depending on what your drums are doing in your mix, and songs like this you can get away with having a ton of reverb and delay on your claps and your snares and stuff like that. In some songs, you probably don't want any. You want the drums super dry. And sometimes you're just going to have something in the middle where you want the drums appearing dry. However, you might have to do something like a parallel where you have a drum room and you can kind of send everything to that as if you were tracking a drummer in real life and had some room mics up to add a little bit of extra ambience and width and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and look at what specifically we're doing. So on this rim hit, I like doing this a lot, especially in verses, is I have a 16th note and it's pretty wet. And as you can see here in H delay, we are just filtering it out. So we're taking out the high end above like 2.3 and the low end below 200. And that is already feeding into Camel Crusher. We're saturating it and compressing it after it's already been through the delay. And then you can see right here with the blips, we have Pro R, which is probably my new favorite reverb. I've been using it a ton lately. And we've got a really, really long delay at like 4.5 seconds. We've got the mix at like 25%. Everything else is kind of 50-50. And then as you can see right here, we took down the decay on the top end. And then we've just done some EQ right here where we did, you know, a nice little boost. because I do want this a darker reverb. And let's hear this in the actual mix, because without the two spatial effects on these things, this just doesn't sit very well in the mix for me. And that's just going to add a lot of that ambience and vibe, and that's what I was talking about before at the beginning of the video, where some of these tips are definitely more production and arrangement based opposed to mixing. However, if you are just dragging in a sample and it's not fitting right, try playing around with reverbs and delays, because sometimes you might be able to get a little bit more life and character out of a sample that could be a good starting point that you're not really paying attention to because it just doesn't sit perfectly off the bat. So we didn't put anything on our kick. We do have a little bit of a reverb on this clap. And again, it's right around 4 seconds. This one's darker because the clap is just so bright. If you have it bright, it's just all you're really going to hear is that like super shimmery tail. And then the mix on this is lower. So in the mix of everything, and it makes it to where the tail of that clap just sits in nicely with the tail of those blips and those rim hits. The clap still feels dry in the mix, and it's still adding that element of being a dry element coming in. So don't be afraid to keep elements decently dry, but still have something like this thrown in on top just to make sure that it's actually tucked in nicely with everything else that you've already got happening. We did the same thing with the hats. I threw on RC20, and then we've just got a little bit of kind of color right here, and then some space right here. So this is really just spreading everything out. And then it's just adding a little bit of the shimmery delay, or reverb, I'm sorry. So I like to do that a lot with hi-hats and with auxiliary percussion and stuff like that, is that like, I don't want everything up the middle all the time. I've already got these kicks and these snares pretty up the middle, you know, besides the reverbs that are happening. And so with these hats, I did want them to come a little bit farther out, so I used like a doubler setting on RC20, and then just added a little bit of shimmer so they took up a little bit more space in the mix, because in the context of everything, I think they shine a lot better. Also, once we put a vocal in, that's going to kind of get it out of the way of that lead vocal, so we can have that vocal be right up the middle and not really have to battle with the high end of these hi-hats. We can have that vocal be a little bit brighter. So now we've done that, we've talked about tuning them, getting the actual length right, compression and EQ to tighten them up, reverb and delay to add a little bit of vibe. And then lastly, and maybe the most important overall, is going to be just figuring out how to layer your drums. So I want to go ahead and kind of break down what I've put in here. And this is a really, really simple drum production on a song that I just started. So of course, as the song develops, we're going to add a lot more. But let's just go ahead and look at individual elements and see how different they are if we weren't going to go ahead and layer them. So the first thing I had in this song was a blip. I definitely wanted some kind of like really tonal snare. And to me, I immediately just thought that it wasn't enough. I wanted something that had a little bit more transient. I wanted something that had a little bit more poke and attack, but didn't really feel like a clap or a snap or a snare. So that's where I just leaned towards a rim hit. A rim hit is really good in between of having something like a snare or a snap, where you still want it to sound decently organic, and you still want it to have a lot of attack. However, you don't want something that's got the crack of a snare, and you don't want something that's got kind of the looseness or the liveliness of a snap. So that's why we added this in. And it just gives that blip a nice little extra tail too, because we have that, you know, 16th note delay that kind of trails off. And we can even turn that rim hit down quite a bit, so it feels a little bit more supportive to that blip. And it's things like that that you can do to where your listener will feel them in a whole production, but especially once this has a vocal on, it's probably not going to be something that they, you know, hear right off the bat, is that you've layered 2 or 3 different things to create one sound, but that's going to give you a lot more control and dynamics when you want to kind of create a wall of sound, or you want to have something that sticks out of a really dense mix, especially something like this where it's just so long and ambient and all of the basses and pads are kind of very droning and very low mid heavy. It gets really hard to have these kind of snappy elements come through. So you can do that again with a kick. We didn't in this song because I don't need a ton of kick information. But let's say we get to the chorus and we're going to have a lot more elements come in. What I would probably do is I would just duplicate this drum track, and then you can even use the same sample. So let's just go ahead and say that we're going to do something like this. So I'm going to filter it out probably above like 400. Go ahead and add some Camel Crusher so we get a nice little bit of snap. And then we're going to shorten this up because I really am just going to want the transient of this. And then you can just kind of blend this into the mix. So you can always just go ahead and duplicate a kick and just kind of compress it, EQ it to where you're just going to give it a little bit more attack and punch. And we don't necessarily need that in this production because it's already pretty minimal and we don't have a ton of top end competing with that kick anyway. But like I said, in the chorus where it might get a little bit more dense, layering up that kick with something like that could be really cool. And then maybe even layering something like a stomp or some kind of more roomy kick to give it a little bit of width and a little bit of extra sustain that's not really low end punch could be a nice little addition. So you'll see right here that we do have a clap coming in. And the reason was because when we had this kick and this hi-hat coming in, it felt a little empty. That could be cool if you want like a super minimal kind of low-key, lo-fi vibe. However, I wanted it to definitely lean more towards the hip-hop R&B side. And speaking of EQ real quick, I'll show you something in real time. I'm hearing this in the mix is a little bit pokey. So maybe we can do something like that. And then, you know, you just take out any kind of frequencies that are bothering you in the entire mix. So we've kind of done everything. We have made sure everything's tuned to the key of the song and tuned to where we feel like it just fits in with the frequency range that we kind of have at hand. We have shortened up samples and lengthened samples to make sure that they are the right, you know, length and they have the right attack and sustain to really fit the vibe that we're going for. We've compressed and EQ'd to make sure that they're tight and they fit in our mix dynamically and frequency wise. And then we've gone through and added some reverb and delay to give everything just a little bit of shimmer and shine and kind of give it a little bit of extra vibe that you're not going to get just dragging the sample straight in. And then we went through and we made sure that we are layering things to add depth and dynamics and kind of keep the drum production going where it feels simple and there's not a bunch of stuff happening rhythmically. However, it is taking up all of the room in that frequency range and you are adding things to keep the listener interested. So hopefully these 5 tips will help you kind of arrange your drums and mix your drums a little bit better. With drum mixing, especially using samples, feel free to keep it simple once you're actually in the mixing phase. There's probably not going to be a ton that you have to do EQ and compression wise. That's why I like to really focus on like just getting the sample right from the start, and then other than that, just getting it in tune and kind of adding all of those extra little flavors that you particularly want rather than, you know, just completely obliterating the sound with compression and EQ. So keep it simple, do whatever fits your vibe, do whatever fits your song, and hopefully these tips help. As you can see, there are a ton of things that you can do to get your drums sitting just right. Try all of these tips and tricks, maybe mix and match them however you want or however it's going to fit your production. Of course, it's going to change. Not every drum will have, you know, an 1/8 delay that's going to be super long or really long reverb. However, some of these are just nice little tips, especially in ambient songs like this, to get the drums to sit a little bit better and be part of the arrangement rather than just a little percussive noise on top. So if you like this video, like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to see more videos, check out our channel or come over to our website. We have makepopmusic.com where we sell all of our samples, presets, courses. You can watch all of our videos. We have blog posts. And other than that, come join the community on Facebook and chit chat. You'll learn a ton of stuff in there. It's really fun to hang out. Maybe you'll meet some friends or some clients. Other than that, we'll be back next week with another video. Let us know what you want to see in the comments below, and we will see you next time. Stay safe, everybody. Much love. Peace out.